So what brings me here today is really a couple of books. It's one book that comes out of the second book. So in graduate school, instead of working on my dissertation, I decided to write this book with some colleagues called the Federal Handbook. We were trying to catalog all the ways in which individuals can make a difference in the world, around the whole range of issues that one could possibly make a difference around. So environmental, human rights, and social justice, all of that into a kind of action guide that also broke down kind of our major global challenges, etc. So out of that book, which is a 400-page book, a couple of years passed, and readers were getting back to me, and they were all, for the most part, getting back to me surrounding 2 pages in a particular chapter on shopping, in which I asked people to take actions. We've written up a little grid marking good guys and bad guys, and so I realized that there was this real need out in the public sphere for a comprehensive assessment of what companies are doing. What are they doing with your dollars? And so this is now my field of study. So as far as I can tell, there are only a handful of people that study it from the perspective of the consumer. There's a lot of people studying corporate social responsibility. There's obviously a lot of people studying business ethics, but most of them are missing the perspective of the consumer. And so this is one of 4 systems, which I'll mention later, that exist currently in the world that I know of that try to relay this information directly to consumers. I do mine through 25 years of data from third-party sources. There are roughly 52 major sources of data that I currently integrate into the system, and it goes back as far as 1987. So incidents back then, which are weighted lighter, are still taken into account. The result of my research has been this little guide, which I hope you have a copy of in front of you. This is the 4th edition. Without that much publicity, it has sold now maybe 200,000 copies, and the 5th edition is coming out next year. And it's kind of a handy little book to look up companies and brands and see what they're doing in the world. There's also a website which relays the information for the most part for free. It's nice because it's in color. And then there's a shopping app, which is updated every year or 2 so that people can bring it around in their pocket. But before we get too far along in this process, I want you to do a quick exercise. I want to make sure that this is interactive and speaks to where you are. So if you would mind passing one of these back. And we're going to start on the side that says, check any boxes. I just want you to take a minute or 2. Look through that very briefly. I don't want you to kind of hand and fall over it. Just kind of go through and check off or circle anything that is an issue that you think is important in some way. It's the whole of the category. You can check off the major box. Put question marks by things. What I'm really looking for is questions to be generated by these exercises. So just take a minute, and if there are questions that come up, just take note of them, because a good chunk of this is an extended Q&A in about 10 or 15 minutes. So I want to make sure that absolutely every question you have is answered. I would like you to fill in if there are other things that you care about, that you think companies may be involved in, that you add those there. There are issues that you're not sure if they're involved in them, or values that you hope are represented at some level in the corporate or economic sphere. Yeah, as soon as you're done with that side, if you are done, on the back, it's a little bit of a different exercise. These are a listing of some common categories of purchases. And I'd like you to jot down some of your favorite brands. Fast food, ice cream, coffee, airline, bank, cleaning supplies, or toilet paper, cell phone, shoes. Just jot down whatever brand you are wearing or that you like for some reason. Tend to buy a lot of beer and wine down there. I better like beer than wine actually. Maybe another 15, 20 seconds. And then what I'd like you to do is actually, if you don't already know each other, I'd like you to introduce yourself to your new partner for this particular workshop. So the two of you, take a minute, introduce yourselves, and I want you just to compare what you have. I want you to discuss what are the issues, are there overlaps, are there differences, and identify questions you have. Questions or different. Go ahead. All right. Sorry to cut you off so soon. We will get a chance to work together in a few minutes. Before I move on, though, since we do have so few people, can I ask, are there any questions, particularly on the front side? I'll answer questions about specific brands and companies in a few minutes. But issues, were there any other issues you didn't see listed that you would have liked to see listed? Were there issues you weren't really sure what they were about? Let's do a few questions about that.
I don't know what greenwashing is.
Okay, great. So greenwashing was the original form of washing. It comes out of the term whitewashing. And so greenwashing is the practice by which companies pretend to be environmentally friendly when in fact they're not. So they basically make their product or make their company look green when in fact it's anything but. So you're probably much more familiar with the practice than the term. Blue washing is the same, but according to labor issues. You know, we treat our workers fairly, we pay them good wages, blah, blah, blah. That's blue washing. And pink washing is a more recent term with the proliferation of, have you seen the breast cancer awareness pink ribbon? So that started getting slapped on everything. And after a while, people were saying, well, wait a second, really? Are all these companies really supporting breast cancer awareness? And it's something we can talk about in more detail later, how this is a kind of wider practice, but pink washing was particular to breast cancer awareness. Like everybody's getting a little pink ribbon on and saying, we're good, we're breast cancer awareness company. What else? Other questions?
Eco-innovations.
Eco-innovations, yeah, it was tough to come up with a term for that, but if, there are companies out there that are kind of pushing the environmental technology to create things that are more efficient. I don't know if anybody has read the book Cradle to Cradle by William McDonough. So, you know, the book itself is put together not on paper, but a kind of polycarbonate material in which you can dip it into a certain solution and off comes all of the ink. And it's just blank again and you reprint whatever you want on it. It's that kind of stuff that there are certain companies out there that are trying to push the boundaries of what can be environmentally responsible. So eco-innovations is, you know, supporting that particular value. Anything else?
Oh, well, just one thing that in the environmental section, I didn't see like specifically. I guess it kind of could go into resource conservation. But just like water use, even reusable water, just monopolizing how much water we're using.
Yeah, that's a great one. It's an issue that has gotten a lot of coverage. It does come under some of the other stuff, but it might be a good one to add in general. Yeah, really important one. All right. So from here, I want us to watch just a little video because this is a nice representation of the kind of stuff that happens every now and then that gets people to suddenly come back to this space. You know, we have our lives, we're all very busy. And so we're not always in this headspace of, you know, do my dollars really make a difference in impacting these issues? And does it really matter that these companies are doing these things? And so let's see if we can just get this little reminder.
There has been another horrific incident at a garment factory in Bangladesh. An 8-story building collapsed today, killing at least 145 people. This just months after a fire killed more than 100 people and put the unsafe working conditions at many factories in the global spotlight.
I previously didn't know that the Gap was not signed this contract, not involved in maintaining their labor safety. Like, this was unknown to me. That even though it was a big New York Times article, it still didn't give as much information as you think it would. Like, I don't really know many people in our generation who have come across it.
It's more of a question of like you said, having that moral conscience as you're buying something or pulling something off of a rack, and having the person who made it in mind, I think is really powerful and can go a long way.
You have to have this new video game, have all the coolest toys. And so you have one message where if you're trying to teach a kid, yeah, this stuff is bad, the working conditions where they produce this stuff is horrible, they're not treating people correctly, and they really can't connect with that human suffering aspect of it. The counter message of this is the greatest thing ever, this is so cool, outweighs that. You can't see the pain.
A lot of companies are using these practices, so after they see what's going on, probably the best course of action would be for the customers to complain and let the companies know that they know what's going on and they want something to change.
I just want to give you a sense of that again, because it will happen every now and then. There will be a news story that will bring people back to this particular issue. The oil spill, the death of 1,100 plus people in Bangladesh, all making more or less the clothes that we wear. And suddenly, we realize that there's something about the system that we're not quite understanding. It's not getting back to us, because none of us would, if we had visited these factories or gone around and visited all of these oil rigs, etc., would have just said like, oh yeah, here, take my money. This looks like a great place to work, or this is a wonderfully environmentally safe operation, etc. So I want to establish that connection, and I want you to get that while these events, the media will cover, once in a blue moon, when it gets bad enough, Apple and Foxconn, etc. We really just get a very small picture of a much bigger puzzle. So the Bangladeshi event is really only a symptom of a really deeply broken system that we have all become dependent on. And it's very difficult, I could sit around and deconstruct that video forever, because in some ways, even the video itself, which is this call to move to action, is problematic because it doesn't really give you exactly how to move to action and something very practical and something sustainable in the long term, and that's what I hope to talk about today, because that's what we need. We don't need, the next time an event comes up, then we feel kind of activisty, and then it goes away, we fade, we get back to work, and then we get the next one, and then the system can't go on like that. We need something better. So I've been looking into this for about 2 decades, the last decade more seriously than the first, but I've been kind of poking around ever since I was an undergraduate in this field, and I wanted to impart a few lessons that I learned along the way. The first one was a big one. This, I came out of the environmental movement in the 1990s with Earth Day, and this I had to learn early on, and I think it's important for us to keep this message moving forward, and that is that we are not going to fix our global problems by just saving the environment. And the same goes for consumption, and most of the ethical consumption alternatives we have out there are focused on this environmental aspect, which is incredibly important. However, it is not everything. As a former professor of mine used to say, if we live in a world in which all t-shirts are 100% sustainable organic hemp t-shirts, and yet they're still made in sweatshops, we haven't moved forward that much. Okay, that's not the world we live in. We have to take into account all of the aspects of responsibility to get those pieces of the puzzle to come together properly. The second one may be obvious, but I think it's really important for us to kind of internalize, and that is that you cannot trust the companies themselves. Not because they're all evil or have bad intentions, but rather because they are involved in a system in which they have to compete against each other, and the competition is very rough and tumble, and if they decide to unilaterally disarm, they will be eaten alive. So You can go onto any company's website currently. This was not the case, by the way, when I started looking around 2 decades ago. But now, today, you can go to ExxonMobil's website, go to Walmart's website, go to the worst company you can think of, Monsanto's website, and you will find an annual accounting for their responsible behavior. And if you read it, you will come away thinking, I think I have these guys all wrong. This is great stuff. Yeah, there's like 200 pages documenting what they did this year and what they've been doing for the past 10 years. I mean, it's great sounding stuff. The problem is that there is no third-party verification. There is no one holding them accountable. They're basically writing very pumped-up versions of their own resumes and focusing only on those things that make them look good, and not on the things that would make them look bad. In part because that's what they're good at. This social responsibility thing is fairly new still. And what they're good at is things like PR and branding and advertising, etc. So they use a lot of those skills to take care of this new marketplace. The other problem is that most of the researchers out there that are being paid top dollar to do research on these companies are working in the socially responsible investing community. So they're working for the people who say, you know what, I have a bunch of money that I need to invest, but I have had a change of heart and I think it's important for me to invest these in a responsible manner. This seems like a great thing, right? You're going to get these companies and then you're responsible to get these investment dollars. And it's a huge, lucrative industry. Over $1 trillion, maybe a few trillion now. Globally, socially responsible investments. The problem is, for socially responsible investing firms to sell their investment packages, they have had to make sure that their packages compete neck and neck with the non-responsible packages. So, you know, if you look at 2 investment packages, one return is 10% a year and the other one's 2%, you know, you feel responsible, but you don't feel 8% a year responsible on, you know, $200,000. So what they've had to do is really make these investment filters very light, so light so that these investments can compete kind of head to head, almost exactly with the non-responsible ones. So when you go and dig into, you know, who is ranked well in these private research systems, which look like they have this wonderful data, and these are top researchers that are doing this kind of work, there's a problem because there's a conflict of interest. If they were to create the filters to kind of strong in such a way that would weed out most of the bad guys, they end up with filters that are not competitive. So you can go and look at some of these cases for the top companies, and you'll find a lot that don't seem to kind of make common sense work. Here's the other problem, is that while the media does a better job, obviously, than the companies themselves, or these think tanks that have direct conflicts of interest, the media cannot play the role of neutral arbiter because most of our media sources are also hamstrung by profitability. I teach a course on not just consumer corporate social responsibility at Holy Cross, but also for years I've been teaching on a course on media, sociology, and television. And one of the problems is that you get this more than ever right now, right? The newspapers collapsing all over the US. I mean, people need readers, they need eyeballs, they need viewers to sustain, just to sustain the company. The newspaper, the website, the television station that has to compete, by the way, not just against other news stations, but against Family Guy and Breaking Bad and all of the entertainment that you can flip to instead of watching the news. So the bar has been raised so high that it's no longer possible for them just to do that kind of straight, you know, perhaps somewhat boring, in-depth reporting you might find on PBS. You know, let's watch an 8-hour documentary on the Civil War, or, you know, the really great stuff that never will fly on television. So what you get is this emphasis on stories that will draw readers. So Walmart Goes Green is a good draw as a headline and a story. Walmart does something terrible, as everybody knows Walmart's into terrible. Walmart goes green is good. Ben and Jerry's is involved in a scandal is also a great headline because most people want to learn, they're excited, they're enticed. And let me just briefly mention the Apple and Foxconn case as an example. So, does everybody remember this story? Right? Apple, it turns out that this Foxconn facility in China, workers are committing suicide, and it's a horrible, they're being underpaid, and there's just like kind of 7, 8, 9, 10 things that are going wrong with this facility. And of course, this is one of the places where they make the iPhone. And so immediately becomes Apple involved in this scandal of Foxconn. Partly because Apple is on the rise at that point, it's kind of this #1 company, it's taking the most profitable company in the world, space from ExxonMobil. It's also kind of very hip and kind of cool, and it's on everybody's mind and everybody's pocket. It's also has a record of responsibility and seems legitimate and seems like a little bit of a cut above many other companies. And so here it comes, here's Foxconn, filled with scandal, and so the focus is on Apple and Foxconn. I don't know if anybody listened to This American Life, but one of the original stories that came out of Foxconn, one of the original in-depth reports of Foxconn, turned out that the guy was in part fabricating himself. And it came out later, and like all fabrications or misquotations or stories that go the wrong way after a while, the redaction is always on page 50, and the story was on page 1. So it wasn't that Foxconn wasn't involved in many of these things, it was. But that part of it was fabricated. The other thing that was not covered very well was that every now and then you would hear, well, Foxconn makes devices for more than just Apple. It makes it for Dell, and it makes it for Sanyo, and it makes it for Panasonic, and it makes it for Sony, and it makes it for, on and on and on. There are, a whole list of companies that are utilizing Foxconn. But the one that makes the headline is Apple. And so what you get is you get these little blips of understanding without getting the context. Again, just like if you watch that video, you think like, oh, it's the Gap again, huh? It's not the Gap. It's about our apparel industry, and this just happened to be the one. The BP oil spill was not about BP. And Foxconn was not about Apple. It was about an industry that is not being covered well and not being responsible. The fourth thing, which may be useful to understand, is that philanthropy is actually not a good guide for you as a consumer to understand responsibility. So like that pink washing with the breast cancer awareness, anytime you see a product that says I'm donating such and such of the profits to X, Y, and Z, this is not a good guideline. In fact, companies have utilized philanthropy to exploit the public since before corporate social responsibility was a term. Every company doesn't just have a CSR report that comes out every year. Every company has a philanthropic arm. So ExxonMobil has a Save the Tiger Fund. And the Save the Tiger Fund actually saves tigers. They give it to an organization, a nonprofit, that actually goes out and is saving tigers, which is really important. And for ExxonMobil, it's a huge win to have this little thing because they can throw it anywhere at any time that they want to talk about the good things they're doing. Now, what percentage of its total revenue does it spend on the Save the Tiger Fund? 0.00000 something. It's just nothing off of that. But now they have the Save the Tiger Fund. So this is what you have to watch out for. It can cost them very little and also distract you from their larger operations, which are impacting the world on a wide scale on a daily basis. The most philanthropic company at the time, I don't know if this was nationally or just in Texas, of its day was Enron. Right? Enron became the poster child for the most irresponsible company for many years because of all the horrible things it was engaged with in the general public sphere, and they were the biggest kind of giver in their community. events. They were sponsoring everything. The final thing is that ultimately, and this may be a little bit of bad news, you can't rely on a single system. There are 4 major systems, including my own, and you probably shouldn't just stick with one. And I'll talk a little more about that in a bit. The most popular system currently in the US, you can see the other 2 are outside the US, is Good Guide out of UC Berkeley, fairly local. And it's out of UC Berkeley, so there's not like any inherent conflict of interest. But the data that they use is somewhat problematic. It involves some third-party data. It involves some survey data directly with the companies, which on the one hand is good because it's first-hand data, but on the other hand, you're asking the company again to describe its own responsibility, and thus they have the most conflict of interest involved. And finally, they do use these, I mentioned these guys, the SRI data crunchers, Asset4 and KLD, that also have conflict of interest. They do use their data. And so if you look at Good Guide is actually pretty good at pointing out the good guys, but it's terrible at pointing out the bad guys. And this has been a problem in CSR for the longest time. You'll find lists of the 100 most ethical companies of the year, the 100 greenest companies of the year. By the way, most of those lists are terrible to begin with, but you will almost never find the 100 least ethical companies. You almost never find the 100, ungreenest companies of the year. Okay? No one wants to create that list. It's like you want to hand each other awards. You don't want to give out any grade below either. This is what I'll end on, and then I'm going to get you back into groups for activity. I really, I wasn't first that particularly interested in ethical consumption. I kind of fell into this because I was interested in understanding how individuals can engage larger global social problems. And this came to the fore, but the more I have studied it, the more I really believe that this may be just as important as democratic participation, as voting. In part because our voting takes place, if we're really good, every 2 years, for most of us, even a little bit on the ball every 4. But consumption takes place daily. And this form of power that we're transferring is very liquid and very universal, and very easily accumulated by these companies, and can be turned into anything. And is currently being turned into things that we, in many cases, are not aware of and would not support. And every year, if you want to think about dollars as votes, the average family is casting roughly 22,000 votes a year at random. And not at random in the sense that they don't know what they're buying. They know what they're buying, they just don't know the impacts that those purchases are having on the world. And in many cases, they probably would not want those impacts to take place if they truly knew what those were. It's really important for us to begin to understand this all as kind of various forms of power. So we have democracy in order to keep power accountable in the political sphere. And when we see power abused in the political sphere, we have many examples of this in many parts of the world. We found that those systems are not, that desirable. And so we have this thing called democracy. We do not have a system of accountability that is similar in the economic sphere. But arguably, that power is just as potent and maybe even more potent than political power in our modern world. Okay, so for the next 10 minutes, maybe a little less, 10 minutes maybe, I want you to get back in your pairs, and I want to make sure that one of the 2 of you at least has something you can explore on, like a laptop or a smartphone or an iPad, because I want you to now try to figure out some answers to your questions. So like you have those brands and companies on the back of that paper. I want you to see if you can dig up some resources, either that you know about already and want to share with the person that you're partnering with, or that you haven't heard of. I also have a little handout for this, just in case you get lost. You can refer to this. These are just my suggestion, and these are only websites. Most of these are not app-based, so you can go exploring in the world of apps or in the world of the web. Or just explore Pip on your own. But I want you to go out and look for resources. See if you can answer these questions on your own, and if you can't, tell me where your disappointments are, what you have found, what you have questions about. Jot down all the different questions that you might have as you go through this process. So you're going to have, just under 10 minutes, and I want you to even exchange with each other what you know about as a good resource, and you find useful, etc. Go ahead.
So are they using on the Mac?
It could be, or you could just go exploring and say, I really want to find out. I want to type in into my app, search it, ethical and stuff, or I want to type in, researching CSR. See what happens. So, how's it going on? So, really feel it's for whatever reason, and the other side is issues. This is a little bit of a guide if you want to look online, and you can also just browse a little. I really want you to see to see if you can find what you're looking for. Something to go to places. Or and just generate those questions All right, you still have 2 minutes left, but I just want to focus you in the last 2 minutes. I'd like each group to have at least 3 questions. It can be anything. What do you know about this website? What do you know about this app? Or what do you know about this company? It could really be anything, or they could be about some practical thing that you don't know how to square a particular circle in this field when you're thinking about, okay, I'm going to walk out of here and then I'm going to do what with my shopping? Like if you need that question answered, make sure to jot it down because I'm going to open it up for an extensive Q&A in 2 minutes. Go ahead, make sure you have 3 questions, between the 2 of you at least. All right. I'd like to hear some questions. We have almost 20 minutes for questions, and I think I'm probably in the best position to answer these at the moment. So I don't know if I could name another expert that has that. I'm even, like, I like my system, but I'm not totally like a system loyalist. So I'm not just like, this is the greatest, So ask away. What do you have?
So for the different certifications that exist, like Fair Trade, Rainforest Alliance, are there ones that are better, and are there ones that really don't mean anything?
Yeah, that's a great question. Okay, it's a little complicated. Rainforest Alliance is probably the lowest level certification in the area. It means something, not a lot. Organic, the problem with organic is not that it's a meaningless label, but that there are products now that have the organic label that are very meaningful. And then there are products that have an organic label that are literally destroying what it means to be organic. So I'll give you a quick example, milk. So there's a company called Organic Valley. Organic Valley is one of the best companies that I know of on the planet. It is literally just a network, it is the largest cooperative in the US. It's a network of small family farms all over the place, all trying to come together to compete as if they were a big company, and they're not. And it's the first time anything like this has really been tried on that scale, and they're doing amazing stuff. And I cannot say enough good stuff about them, and their organic standards are, as far as all the third-party data that we have available, is just through the roof. Okay? Outside of maybe you going to a local farm and getting the glass bottle of milk yourself, that is as good as it gets in the supermarket. The absolute worst thing you can get in the milk aisle with organic on it is Horizon Organic, that has been raked over the coals 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times by various third-party companies that are organizations that monitor the organic industry, like Organic Consumers Association, because it's literally gutting the standard. It's the reason why the whole of the organic standard is getting watered down, is that they are finding loopholes and ways around, so that they can basically make the standard kind of industrial factory farming method work and have an organic stamp on it. And so, $1 to Organic Valley is one of the best dollars you'll ever spend, and $1 to Horizon Organic is one of the worst. And they're both organic. Fair trade used to be the gold standard. When something was labeled fair trade, didn't matter, you could trust, that was as good as it got. Now that standard is under fire. I don't know if you've noticed, you can get a sense for this. First it was on just kind of really obscurely named products, but now you can find it on Ben & Jerry's. There are some Nestle certified fair trade things. You can start to see it kind of growing into something, well, wait a second, these things are huge. And so part of what's happening in the world of fair trade is There are people that are currently in talks trying to get a number of separate fair trade labels, which is going to be confusing, but to show that certain fair trade is real fair trade, and other fair trade is kind of watered down fair trade, which is exactly what's happening with things like Nestle and even Ben and Jerry's. And some of this is really kind of a watered down version of what it used to be fair trade. There are also a bunch of labels that are just completely meaningless that you can stamp on things. If you ever see a Green America certification, which you almost never see, that is a gold standard. If you ever see B Corp on something, that is a gold standard. Those have yet to be watered down. The next best thing we have is fair trade, and it's in the process of being watered down. And then organic is all over the map. Other questions?
I have a question. Actually, I just thought about this question. We were talking a little bit about this earlier. In terms of the ratings that we see, like on Good Diet and what have you, is the rating in comparison to their peers, or is it in comparison to, as compared to like an independent standard? Okay, so we don't know how well their peers are doing as compared to them in terms of like the numbers that we.
Sometimes they'll allow you to organize it like that, but for the most part, most of the systems, and my system used to be based on a relative standard, but I went to, which all the other models more or less went to, which was, kind of drawing a line and saying, here is the line, are you above or below, and how far? Because in that sense, a good company is a good company is a good company, rather than you're a good airline, or you're a good chocolate company, but you're a terrible bread company. Which the problem is there are companies like that, Kraft, and it's the same company. How can, how do I know when to support Kraft and not? It's just total mess for consumers. So everybody more or less has gone to this. We'll take this standardization project and give the best ones A's and the worst ones F's, or whatever it is, the zeros and tens, and go from there. If you want to see comparisons, sometimes they'll organize them by industry, or you can look online for that. I've organized all my stuff by industry so that, like, you want to buy bread, if you look up bread, there's all the bread. And then you're like, okay, this is here, this is not here. Okay, yes, it's a B, but it's the best one I got.
So we're all students, and I think, at least for me, when I go shopping, there are two things that really, really matter to me. It's price and convenience. And I think that these other concerns, when I have the choice in front of me, then I'm like, oh, okay, well, this is, I'll pay 20 cents more, yes, but I won't pay double. Or I won't, go out of my way to go and find the Whole Foods where it's also double the price. So how do you, as a student, what's the best way to go? I mean, I'm thrift shopping and that sort of thing, but are there good solutions to that?
So I'll give you the short term and the long term, because I was a student not too long ago. It may not be apparent, but not too long ago. And I was a graduate student forever, and that means about the same. So what I started doing was deciding for myself that there would be a certain thing that I would focus on. So, for example, bananas. And I would say, I'm going to just get organic or fair trade bananas, and that's it. That's my contribution to this whole thing, and we're going to work from there. That's what I can afford, right? And when I found other stuff that I could afford and had, available, etc., sometimes I would add them in if they were within my budget, sometimes not, etc. But as my budget got larger, as I started becoming more established, I started adding to that. And even when, this may very well happen to many of you. So when I was in graduate school, I was in Boulder, Colorado. So I had everything available to me. Now that I'm actually a faculty member, I'm in Worcester, Massachusetts, and I have almost nothing available to me, right? So I have the money. I'm just standing there like, give me all the crazy, A companies because I'm ready to support them, but I go to the supermarkets, and the supermarkets don't carry that, right? And to get to Whole Foods, I have to drive about 45 minutes, which might not seem long, but when you are grinding it every day, like 45 minutes there, then shop, then 45 minutes back, it's just not that realistic, unless you're going to make something like a once every month or 2 month trip. So that's the short term. The long term we were discussing earlier, which is what we really need is a very kind of sophisticated system which allows you to combine ethical ratings with availability and cost, and be able to click on things so that you can see, like, where do you get this huge bang for your buck that is both cost effective, available, and ethical, and then you dive in. That's what we need. That is exactly, and I don't think, you know, we're 100 years away from that. I think we could get there in a few years, but it'll take some doing.
I just like to think about that, I guess, longer term, what are things that we can do to get this stuff to Worcester? You know, like, how do we actually make it more available? How do we vote with our dollars or whatever?
Yeah, that's a tricky one, right? Because Worcester is a deindustrialized, large, working class place.
Yeah.
And so the Whole Foods is not really interested at the moment. It takes, you know, probably, that's where I think individuals may not matter as much as coordinated groups, lobbying organizations, right? If you get a bunch of people in an area at a similar time to then contact said company and say, we want you here, you might get traction. But we're really talking about economic models that are driving the basics for them. And so unless they really know there's a groundswell that's going to translate into economics, they're not just going to start plopping stores down. Good questions. What else?
Okay, so this kind of also goes along with the short-term versus long-term strategy. And we were looking at boycott.
Yeah.
And I also am just thinking, because I started to kind of look at some of the rankings of companies, and it's pretty noticeable that the biggest companies that spend the most on advertising often seem to be in the lower levels of the grades. And so it's hard to imagine that my choice not to purchase some of these things is going to have any significant impact, even if I tell everyone I know and they tell everyone they know, because these are just such mega powers. And so I guess I'm kind of wondering, is the idea to boycott to divert our money away from these bad guys, or is the idea that we put our dollars in and plump the good guys so that we're doing good by buying versus not buying?
That's a good question. So, maybe because I have my undergraduate degree in international relations, which is just basically an international political science degree. I always, when I come up against any kind of major question, I harken back to the political sphere. So when I think about voting, are we interested in voting in the good guys or voting out the bad guys? Well, we need to do both, and we have to do it more often and more effectively all the time. And one of the advantages that we have at the moment that we didn't used to have 10, 15, 20 years ago is that we now have the potential to do this on a daily basis, to plump up the little green companies that are sprouting up all over the place, the legitimate ones, you know, the organic valleys or the equal exchanges or the seventh generation or whatever, you know, to keep plumping them up, or even all the local that we haven't talked about, all the farmers market types and the, you know, the really kind of local independent businesses and all of those, right? While at the very same time pulling the money away from these large mega corporations, at least the ones that are really creating havoc with the economic system. And it does matter. It's a little bit like, again, the dollar conundrum. Does it really matter if I don't buy the Hershey bar? Does it really matter if I don't fill up at ExxonMobil today? You know, is the same as the voting conundrum, which is, does it really matter if you don't vote in this off-year election coming up? 2-year, it's not even a presidential election. Come on, right? Does it really matter? What?
I'm just saying, not that would matter.
Right? Like, no single vote technically matters, right? There's almost no election that was thrown by a single vote. But collectively, it's all that matters. Every vote that is lost degrades the democracy. And every vote that is gained supports the democracy. And it's the same in the world of economics. Every dollar gained and lost matters. And sometimes it's a very small percentage of dollars that gets the companies to wake up. So for example, no company used to have a CSR reporting. They didn't even used to fake it, right? Now they're all faking it, which is actually progress, because they all see it as important enough that they have got to devote resources to it. Now they're doing it in large part in a disingenuous manner, but they are devoting dollars to it, which means it is important now. And they'd like to devote less dollars rather than more. But as they start to see, I mean, if there's anything that these mega corporations are good at, it is that they understand how to attract dollars. That's why they exist, that's why they're the biggest ones. And as they see the dollars shifting slightly, they pay attention, because that's what they're good at. They pay attention to the micro shifts so that they don't have to manage the macro shifts that come later. So as they see people going in certain directions, they will respond even if it's 1%. Right? The low-cost sector, the lifestyles of health and sustainability, is this hugely burgeoning market. And one of the kind of ironies of our current state of affairs is, one of the things I think we bemoan is that many times these kind of green companies get big enough, and then here comes the big company to gobble them up. And they become part of this larger company, and then they think like, oh, we just lost that. Where do we turn to now? The flip side of that is they wouldn't gobble them up unless they were enormously profitable. So Honest Tea being gobbled up by Coca-Cola, this was incredibly profitable. Burt's Bees being gobbled up by Clorox, Ben & Jerry's by Unilever. It's because the profits were exploding in these areas. And the only reason they were exploding was because people were wanting their dollars to be kind of more ethically spent. So they're already doing the kind of next disingenuous step, which is spending more money, in part because they see how much money is being attracted by these values consumers, these ethical consumers. So, the momentum is on our side. The responses will take some work. None of these companies that are that big will go yesterday. What else?
What about energy consumption? Because, you said, oh, I'm not giving my money to ExxonMobil, to Shell, to BP. It's just like, anytime you fill up your car, you're doing something in sense. So I'm just wondering, how are we supposed to deal with that?
When I started this process, actually, the first sector I investigated was the petroleum sector. And that's originally why I did a relative ranking system. Was because I thought, how can I rank anyone in the petroleum sector from A to F? I mean, aren't they all like F and G and H and J, Aren't they all really just the worst of the worst? And as I kind of moved forward to this more standardized process, I realized that there are significant differences, even between petroleum companies. Now, certain sectors have been in a race to the bottom for a long time. It's not just the energy sector, but just like what we saw in the Bangladesh stuff, the apparel sector has been in a race to the bottom forever. And these are sectors that are really tough nuts to crack, because the question is, what can you buy that is that responsible, that will give you more than just like socks? You can go to Maggie's Organics and buy your socks, okay? But you cannot walk around with socks in the world, and nothing else, right? You have to have the other stuff. And so it's a tough sector, and the momentum is going in kind of problematic direction. But there is better and worse for consumers. And in some ways it's even more important that in the really bad sectors, we push our money to the better than average companies, because it will send a message that maybe you should stop just doing absolutely whatever you want and you're having to deal with it. And part of that has happened a little bit in the apparel sector. We saw just a slight bit of that in the petroleum sector, but it has a lot more work to do. And of course the apparel sector still has all of this behind the scenes. These are very globally complex systems, and to even answer questions costs them millions of dollars, right? And they don't want to spend that money if they don't have to. So you really have to tighten the screws to get that money spent. If we can have anything, we need transparency. I mean, it's again, we're back to government. If we need anything to make government function properly, we need transparency. Because once we have the understanding of what's happening, we can then move forward from there. It's a little bit like, somebody familiar with PolitiFact, the organization that takes, still in its early stages, but takes statements by various government representatives, one-sentence statements, and then goes and researches to decide whether it's true, mostly true, half true, mostly false, completely false, or pants on fire, lying through your teeth false, right? And then they accumulate these on our various representatives, and you can go and see a scale of how much everyone lies. And that's an important scale to have, that kind of transparency. Because the last thing you want to do is elect the biggest liars over and over again into office. So we need that kind of transparency at the economic level, at the political level, at every level. And we need it translated into scales that we can respond to. Right? We don't just need a barrage of information. We need it synthesized so that we can, in our busy days, go out and actually make choices quickly, practically, and send these votes out in the right direction.
I was going to say, in a similar vein to petroleum companies, it seems like credit card companies function much the same way, where even if you move your money from a bank to a credit union, ultimately you still will have to peg it to a company like MasterCard or American Express. Is that kind of a similar business model?
So what's happened in the kind of banking and particularly the credit card sector, as well in the banking, is what we're dealing with are kind of virtual monopolies and oligopolies. So the basic functioning of capitalism has broken down in some industries. The petroleum industry is an oligopoly, more or less, right? It's a handful of companies that basically control the prices, give basically no consumer choice, and so that's capitalism not functioning. The whole point is that you have competition. The whole point is that you benefit the consumer, that you create innovation. And when you have monopolies and oligopolies, it just dies. So the fact that we even just have Visa and MasterCard for the most part is just strangling that whole enterprise. And we need other options. And when we do have other options, then we can respond more appropriately. But like you mentioned with banks, handfuls of large banks are gobbling up most of the bank, particularly post-crisis, right, post-financial crisis, even at a higher clip. And we need the opposite. We need more options. We need more credit unions. And then we need to have those credit unions have more options to give their debit cards and their credit cards that don't go through Visa and MasterCard. At the moment, we're still in trouble and we're working on that.
So I think my big question, bringing back like kind of the grocery shopping decisions to what we're talking about now, like we made a list of kind of like the worst ones, like insurance, credit card, gasoline, financial, and it was like, and telecom, and it was like, these are the things on the list that we're least able to get rid of. Like half the list I look at and I'm like, fast food, sorry, don't need to buy that, problem solved. But these are things you have to have, and these are where most of your money goes. And they seem to be the biggest offenders. They seem to be the worst of the worst. And then earlier you're talking about how, as organic consumer product companies grow, they get gobbled up by big companies. And, are they just moving in that direction too, of towards an oligopoly? And how do we interrupt it to make sure that we just don't have to support enormous corporations?
Well, again, the forces are fairly powerful and complicated, and they work differently in different industries. So newer industries sometimes don't have the same forces behind them. So in the world of tech, in the world of online, there's a lot more diversity out there. Even though it still has some of the same dynamics, because our whole financial system is set up to reward you as you get bigger. To make it very difficult if you are small, and to reward you as you get bigger. So long term, we need to kind of shift that or flip it to make it not as worthwhile to be big. That will take some time. In the short term, but you have other industries like energy bar market. This is one that's fairly wide open, and some of the earliest, biggest players like Cliff Bar, really high ethical standard that pushed most of the other companies in the right direction. So they think, okay, I want to be Cliff Bar, how do I do that? And they begin to compete with similar ethical standards, right? Because that's where they see the industry headed. But the bottom line is when you have to choose cell phones, petroleum, insurance, between a C and an F, you choose the C. You choose the C because the F is the thing that's dragging the whole thing down. It's dragging the whole industry to the bottom.
And it's the biggest ones.
Yes, technically, or typically they are the largest ones. Typically there's a real correlation between the two. I'm running out of time, so I'm just going to wrap up a little bit. The first thing is, before you go, I just want you to jot down 3 things. Just take a minute that you think you will explore or do or get a hold of or look up online. I just want you to walk away with some kind of actions in hand. Nothing big, but something small. Reading, by the way, you keep those books. It could be flip through the book, or it could be, get organic bananas, whatever it is, go and investigate, boycott. I want you to walk away with some kind of action, because my biggest pet peeve is to go to these things and then to not. I've talked about some interesting ideas and to not have actually had anything to implement. Two or 3 things down. If you're getting stuck, I put this in the book, but I also have it online. As far as I can tell, these are your biggest bang for your buck if you really want to start to make a change where it will matter first. If you got to change one thing, that's all you have time for this year. Then this is my recommendation. Find a bank. If you look under banks, it includes credit unions, rural credit unions, and community development credit unions, and socially responsible banks, and so forth. Find a bank that is doing something decent with your money rather than one that is undermining the whole of the financial system with it. The second is a little simpler. I mean, the nice thing about the bank, you change it once, then you don't even think about it forever. It's just another bank or credit union, whatever you have. The second one, gasoline, is just about you locating the gas station that is somehow on your route to work or wherever it is that you drive around that is a more responsible one. Once you do that, you've got to get the little slight diversion down, and then you're done. You might have 2 to choose from, you choose the better of the 2, you might have 3 or 4. You're not going to drive 20 minutes to get gas, so you put that down. Your supermarkets, your big box stores, and then it's all the way down. So,
Question, sorry.
yeah.
Number 4, retail stores, are you including apparel?
Yeah, like large, apparel stores would be as well more retail. And so, again, in conclusion, when we talk about words like sustainability, and we talk about how we need to build more sustainable systems, a more sustainable economic system, a more sustainable political system, a more sustainable relationship with our environment, it's also important to understand that you need to reconcile sustainability in your own life when you're taking actions or you're trying to be more ethical, which is a slightly different meaning. And that is that you cannot take on all these things at once. those changes won't last. You need to take them one at a time. As a sociologist, I understand the power of pattern behavior. So you incorporate it, you make it a habit, you no longer have to think about it or spend energy on it, and you incorporate the next one, and the next one. And that, actions that you take for a week or a month or 6 months and then drop do not have the same impact as smaller actions that you keep for a lifetime. So build the actions one by one and then maintain them in a sustainable manner over your life, rather than taking them all at once. That's it for me. I'm happy to stay and answer any questions. And, you can contact me over email if you like as well, if you have any questions after this. Anybody, other questions?
So, and this kind of goes back to the question I asked earlier actually too, but I'm thinking right now about, like, there are certain things that I try to opt out of, and I mean, like, I ride my bike to campus most of the time. But I've been making my own cleaning supplies for a while, which is actually really easy to do. You can think of like vinegar and baking soda, and then you're not exposing yourself to some chemicals, and it's really cheap. So now I'm thinking like, well, maybe I should be buying Method and spending money on it instead of.
No. In almost every case, if you have an alternative to anything going on in that industry, your alternative is head and shoulders above. If there was something above an A, that would be it. Every now and then I include something like that where I'll say supermarkets, and at the very top I'll put, farmer's market, which technically is not a supermarket, or I'll put water as a category, and then I'll put tap water, which is not something you can get in the market, right? You have to go home and turn your faucet on, but, right, it's that thing that's like above an A that you can do. So that's always 1,000 times better. Like, when I was living in Davis, I biked almost everywhere. All biking all the time. It was great. Moved to Worcester, no biking anywhere. Trying to bike in Worcester is a death sentence. So suddenly I had to grapple with all of these things that I wasn't as used to grappling with. So if you have the option at the moment to opt out and do these alternatives, they are head and shoulders above almost any opt-in.
On that point, if anyone wants to talk to me about alternatives to buying from mass clothing stores, I know a lot about it.
So, I mean, I buy, and I think I live doing things, but then your dollars aren't going to the good guys. So, I mean, one of the problems with the system in a way is it works, at least in the way you should spend more. And,
Yeah, it's a great question. So here's what happens. Even, every now and then I go to retreats and monasteries and Zen centers and so forth. These places that are basically trying to get themselves out of the society and create kind of a little microsphere for themselves that's usually much more peaceful and more functional. Every time I go, I think I'm getting away, and then I see, hey, look, they have to use cleaning soap. Hey, look, they're using something else. Hey, look, they gotta buy toilet paper. They're not making their own toilet paper, right? And so then I realize again, there is no opting out. You can take your money out of certain things. Theoretically then, what that allows you to do is widen your options for the things you do need money for. Because, and this is no surprise to anybody, typically, the way our system is currently set up, the more responsible, smaller, greener companies are pricier. And so you will likely need the dollars that you save from whatever it is in category A, B, and C to help you get by in category D, E, and F, rather than just going with the C company because it's better than the F company.
So, if you're faced with a choice between a C and an F, you want to go for the C. Is there any appreciable difference between D's and F's?
Oh, yes.
Okay, so
Oh my God.
it's like don't buy F.
Oh my God, yeah. Here's the thing, my rating scale goes from an A to an F because I believe heart of hearts that that is about the most complex rating scale you can give to a consumer without having the brain shut down. Because we're operating at this speed, right? You cannot, like, even good guys, 0 to 10, you're like, I don't know if I should get the 7.8 or the 5.9. You're just like, what? Like, A to F is about as sophisticated, you know, if we're really down to brass tacks, it should be in the big and yellow red. My actual number system goes from +50 to -50. And I don't want to have people overwhelmed by numbers, but ultimately, if I could make the scale count, I would put F's, G's, H's, J's, etc. And that's partly why I put this together, so that people know that there is a worst of the worst, that these are all F's, but they're not just F's. They are dark, horrible, soul-crushing F's, okay? These are as bad as it gets.
Sorry, I have a lot of questions. So I noticed in the fast food category, some of the worst fast foods are headquartered in my hometown of Louisville, Kentucky. And so even though I'm not like out really saying like, you should go get some fast food right now to my friends or anything like that, like those are companies that generally, like they're not gonna stop being employers in my city.
Right.
And so that seems to me like maybe a place where the strategy would actually be like expose and try and like actively push those companies, like in a community organizing type way, because it's me not getting those things. I mean, I don't know, it's kind of like.
No, I got exactly where you're going. Again, I refer back to the political sphere. So when you're thinking about being a good citizen, you're kind of the lowest of your responsibilities is to show up and vote every 4 years. That's really low-level engagement, right? Now, most of us still don't do it, but that's, you know, you can move up from there. And if you get a little more responsible, you begin to kind of like contact your representatives every now and then with an email, or maybe a phone call, maybe you meet with them, maybe you get a group of people and you do more, and there's a lot more to do. This that we're talking about, all this dollar spending, is in some ways the lowest level of the system. Like if we really want to engage, we need to be doing that on top of it. We need to spend the dollar, move our dollar from company A to company B and say, hey company A, I moved my dollar from company A to company B. Hey company B, I moved my dollar to you from them. You know, and let everybody know, keep pressure on them, etc. Because they operate in many ways very much in very similar ways to representatives. When you handwrite a letter to a representative, that does not equal one letter for them. Because no one handwrites letters to representatives. So when they see that, that equals, and somebody has a little equation in the back, 5,000 people's opinions in that district. And so when they see that, they're just like, okay, well, let's put that on the pile, and then they add it all up. They do their statistics and say, okay, here is where your people are at right now. And so you as a customer, you know, your one letter is not one letter, it is a representation to them of their customer base. And if they get enough of those single letters, they begin to really pay attention.
Thank you again.
Yes, thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Oh, and there's an app as well. I've never really actually made money on the app. It is $2, but I only say that because I don't use the book anymore. I just use the app because I can't carry the book around. I always forget it. So I always have my phone.